Hey there. So what I've got up on the screen, let me scroll up to the top so you can see this, is the Epic Literature Overview from week 9. And what I'm scrolling down to is there are a number of lists in this lecture material. Epic poetry is generally written in poetry, right? However, most of the versions of these epics that we'll be reading are not in poetry. So before you set out working on your activity for week 10, I wanted to go through and point out the sorts of things that you should be looking at and what you can safely ignore because you're not actually reading in the form of poetry. So this first chart that I'm looking here has the epic cycle. And this is a list of actions and people and places that occur in epics all over the world. There's a predictable cycle of events that seem to happen. They don't always go in this order, but this is a kind of a rough order, and we'll be looking at this more later in something called the hero's journey. We'll look at that later in the semester. So there are certain elements that happen often in this order, but again, it can uh, be done in different ways in different epics. So, for example, an epic might start off with a charge, a demand from a god that a quest be completed. There might be tests to prove one's worthiness. Along the way, they might gather mythical animal or human helpers. The antagonist is the villain is often supernatural. So he goes through a magical world, sometimes has a low point where he has to actually be rescued. He might even die and have to be resurrected. He might recover his throne or his kingship at the end of the epic. So these are some, this again is called the epic cycle. These can all be used in the week 10 activity. You can look for these elements in the Ramayana. Some other characteristics of the epic. The main character is generally larger than life, some kind of a national hero. We often see his good points and his bad points. That's not held back from us. We see his courage in battle. The setting, down here, the setting usually involves some kind of travel, usually over long distances, sometimes even going into the underworld. And go, other gods play an active role in the outcome of actions. In other words, they interfere with the lives of humans on Earth. So these characteristics of the epic can be addressed. Epic conventions, these are talking about the actual form of the epic itself and does refer to poetic sorts of strategies that we may not see in the Ramayana because it's not written in poetry. So I would go ahead and just skip over this. Some of these things we might see, but I think it would just be confusing to say some of these you'll look for and some of these you won't. So we'll just skip over the epic conventions altogether. So we'll look at the epic cycle, and you'll look at the characteristics of the epic. We'll skip over epic conventions, and we'll look at the final one, characteristics of the epic hero. So some of these, yeah, that's fine. We can look at the epic hero. So what you're going to do with these lists is look at the character of Ramayana and the Ramayana as a whole, the actual whole epic, even in a very abridged version that you're reading, and try to find as many of these characteristics as you can. What would be helpful is if you, for example, you could highlight this whole list of the epic cycle, put it into a document, and then type next to it, is Rama given a quest? Oops, sorry. Can't type on a PDF. Is Rama given a quest? You might type here where my cursor is and say, yes, the charge is. Is he tested of his worthiness? Yes, those tests are. So as you go through, I think that would be the easiest way for you to produce your response to this activity. So I hope that makes sense. You're just trying to identify how many of these lists of characteristics appear in the Ramayana itself, relating to the epic in general and the hero of Rama in particular. Not of Sita. She's not a hero in the terms that we're looking at here. She's not considered an epic hero, so you can't use her for this activity. We'll talk about epic heroines later in the semester. So that's all I have for you.